Welcome. Thank you for joining our Best Practice Series webinar. I'm Becky Melody, your hostess for today's presentation. Brian McCole, Director of the USDM Enterprise Quality Management Practice, will be presenting. The discussion today will cover introductions, webinar logistics, and our discussion topic, how to assess your quality system from a life sciences enterprise perspective. We are proud to have Brian leading our QMS and ECM team. He has over 20 years in the application of GXP compliant IT technology to life sciences organizations and solid experience in life sciences quality management systems as well as supply chain. He has led implementation and validation of FDA-regulated global quality management and ERP systems, and he has experience in establishing business and quality strategy, consent decree, and warning letter remediation programs, as well as CAPA and change management processes. Brian is certified quality auditor and production and inventory manager certified, that's CPIM. USDM is focused exclusively on the life sciences domain. We're the market leader in providing quality and regulatory IT compliance professional service solutions. We're headquartered in Santa Barbara, California, and we've delivered more than 1,000 successful projects with over 300 life science clients. We offer hands-on experience assisting clients with remediation under regulatory distress, and we're the market leader for validation accelerator packs. Our various dedicated practices include global quality and auditing, IT and virtualization, life sciences cloud, UDI track and trace, GRC, laboratory systems and equipment, ERP, PLM, enterprise quality management, manufacturing automation and equipment, clinical and drug safety, business intelligence, program and project management, and of course, our quality management systems practice. The content will be covered in approximately 30 minutes, and then we'll invite you to post questions for our team via the message board on the lower left of your screen, or you can join the discussion on LinkedIn and post any questions for our team there. We are happy to address questions offline as well. Just shoot us a note at usdm@usdm.com. Thank you for joining us, and with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Brian.
Thanks, Becky. Thanks so much. I hope everybody's having a good day today. As Becky said, my name is Brian McCall. I head up the Enterprise Quality Management Practice here at US Data Management, and look forward to having a nice chat with everybody this afternoon. What we'll be covering is looking at the enterprise quality management from an enterprise perspective. And the basis of our discussions will focus around what I call the 4 C's. So after a bit of introduction, we'll get into focusing on compliance, the consistency, the use of the EQMS as a communication tool, and a driver and monitoring system for continuous improvement. As Rebecca said, the webinar is open for question and answers, and we'll definitely leave time in the end for that. So let's get into the first section. Let's talk a little bit of an interview, as an overview of what we're going to be covering. In previous webinars, we talked about the compliance aspects of CAPA, complaints management, deviation management, into metrics and reporting. So we'll touch briefly on that, but more how it pulls into the enterprise and the enterprise perspective. So we'll dive deeper into unearthing what are the hidden benefits of the enterprise quality system, kind of the evolution of quality management systems into an enterprise solution. So let's first take a look at the principles behind quality. We always need to touch this base before we get into the details of and then we'll look at the evolution, and then we'll get into our 4 C's discussion. So everything we do in quality management focuses really around these 2 main principles. One is the evaluation of risk and that assessment, and then the level and effort of remediation commensurate with that level of risk. And now, as we know, as we go through processes and we're handling noncompliance and deviations, risk levels will change. So we also make sure we have the capability to reevaluate risk as we go through the process. And there are all many different risks to look at. Risk to patient and safety, product, branding, corporate assets, and many other things. So there's a lot of different risks. We'll talk mostly about how the risk type pulls into the enterprise view. So before we get into the details, let's first take a look at where we've come from. We've come a long way in quality systems. As you may have seen from the first slide, with some of that grading, I've been through most of these evolutions. So I've been spending a lot of my professional life working with the quality systems and manufacturing arenas in general. So we started with paper-based. That was which were filling out forms, and I do remember working with companies and actually heading up an inventory management process and quality compliance group myself that we had great ideas of using colored folders to identify which were about to end up to be the risk levels and the priorities. So, but it was still a very heavy paper-based process. Moving that around, did a study for clients several years ago about how often a complaint, you're using still a paper system, how often that complaint gets touched, and the analysis of that. And it came down to sometimes between 7 to 14 different individual or functions needed to touch it, the actual paper itself. We then moved to a electronics form, so that helped with the data entry and consistency of the data entry. We'll talk a lot about consistency today. So that helped, but we still had silos of information that we really could not extract the information. A lot of it was in text and in individual records. It could have been spreadsheets, Word documents, PDFs, but really no central data mart or repository. We then progressed from the forms into adding workflow to the process and computerization of quality management systems using a workflow-based engine. This helps with the identifying and delineating roles of the responsibility, so you could have handoffs. You had more visibility of tracking where a nonconformance was in its life cycle. It was easy to pull information out to start doing some trending and reporting against that. But the key was having that role-based process with the visibility of the information within there. Then on top of that, we added quality management system trending and dashboards. We started pulling out the information on a more regular basis, not just in batch, but in real immediate mode, to look at trends, to help identify risk levels, to focus resources on those risk levels as through the quality system, and ultimately move to a more preventive action orientation. That's one of the key things. I know I also do a lot of auditing of quality systems and preparations and in many cases remediations. One of the metrics I always look for when doing those audits is looking at the ratio of preventative actions to corrective actions. Many companies don't track that, but to me that's one of the better trends to use to see how you are progressing and utilizing the data available to you to migrate into a more enterprise solution. So that kind of takes us through the background. So let's now move on to the crux of what we want to talk about today. And as I said, I break this down to enterprise quality systems into the 4 C's. First is establish compliance. There's no doubt in anyone's mind that that's key. That's the foundation. This is a compliance system, but what we'll be looking at is how that compliance is extended to other business benefits throughout the enterprise and the organization. Secondly, we'll look at the second C, the consistency of business practices, not just quality practices, but enterprise-wide business practices. So that, once again, I like to put the auditor's hat on and looking at processes and procedures that are very consistent and uniform across an organization. Once again, we developed a lot of things from silos of information and technology and levels of control, but level loading that across the organization is key. And once again, from an auditor's point of view, it's very essential to have that uniformity across. So third and fourth kind of come together in the communicating of the goals and quality objectives of the organization, actually using your quality system as that conduit and vehicle, and then also driving your continuous improvement, and again using the quality system as the track, trace, and trender for that, and the communication vehicle of that continuous improvement. So, as I said, we're going to delve into each of these. Now, each of these could be its own webinar in itself, and we only have 30 minutes to go here. So, I'll go into each of the 4 C's, and then we'll take a deep dive into just one of the activities, just to give you an idea of what some of those aspects would be. So first, again, going back to the foundation, the compliance standards practice. I do a lot of work, and we all do a lot of work in helping companies formulate and configure, in some cases reconfigure, quality management systems using workflow technologies and other leading standard application software. So I've kind of mapped that around that process of how to build a practice standard that can also then be rolled into a quality system. So the first one is to identify the quality process objectives. You know, what's in here, what needs to be done, who does it, what is the sequence of events, where are the handoffs, what are the touch points. So that's really kind of giving you just the foundation. So that's very critical to have that capability to lay all that out. And then secondly, once you have the key points identified, since this is the compliance, the key aspect here is mapping the compliance to the process. I use a lot of, I'm taking this from validation, using such things such as compliance trace matrices and things like that that allow you to identify within your process what particular activities tied to the compliance guidelines and that you are addressing through that practice. You know, that helps to streamline things to make sure that you have full compliance and met all the requirements. Secondly, it also helps eliminate or diffuse some of the fluff that gets added into processes. And a lot of times it's in response to something that has occurred before, things I refer to as like warts, things that were, what are these steps? Why was this added to the process? In some cases, it was because, way back when an auditor said this, so we've added this to the process. So evaluate, is that still a requirement? Our next step here is, unfortunately, I can't highlight these, so is to list the quality process inputs and outputs. So now we build the process where, what comes in, what's required to come in, what's out, who owns the inputs, who owns the outputs, what format, time frame, sequences of those events. And the next one is once we have that process built, is now looking at brainstorming as to what are the exceptions to the process, the deviations and outliers. This is where science kind of gives way to art, because there's a lot of goes into this that it's hard, because a lot of times we either have, when we go into these discussions, we either have a previous example of something that was an outlier or something that was difficult to manage, or what is the most recent issue or nonconformance that you're currently working on and using that as your focus. What we want is a broader brush of that. We need to identify what are the deviations, what are the outliers, what exceptions could occur, how will we handle them, but we don't want to build our process to focus on the 20% or less, and for the sake of the 80% or more that will go through the normal process. So that's always a key thing. And then once those have been identified, what aspects, again, go back to the risk. What is the risk associated with these outliers? What's the probability of occurrence? What's the probability of detection? And where does that come into how and what resources to apply to that? And then another area in building these standard practices is structure. Having structured walkthroughs also helps. And this is really sometimes fun to have, is that you have different people come in and actually walk a problem or issue through a process. And the key here is to make sure that we have all eyes on this from different perspectives. Just kind of throwing up some other examples. A lot of times the quality processes are built by those who are more likely to be managing the output of the process. It's very important that we also include those who input that, those who need information from it, those who do such things as investigations or other activities, to make sure that we've accounted for how they would handle things. A lot of times we put a little bit too much control, too many sign-offs, because we're looking at it from a final perspective, and we kind of lose sight of the person who's entering say a product complaint at the beginning. What do they need? How do they need to do it? How can they standardize on it? How can they pull information out of that whole process? So that's one of the areas here. And one thing that's really good to do is to document the process before you get into the technology and the workflow, to make sure that you have defined what you want and then how the system or process will support that. Okay, so moving on to a deep dive in one of these areas. As I said, we'll look at each of the 4 C's and we'll dive into one of the areas as time permits, is identifying the problem statement. Again, this is kind of the front end. We spent so much time going back and forth trying to identify, do we have the right information? Was the problem or the initiation point of the process written correctly? Does it have all the information we need? So it's to kind of expedite those process and also eliminate the redundancy of back and forth and back and forth. A lot of training is required to do this, and it's very good to have standards as to how to, and workshops on how to write problem reports and how to write deviations. As we know, a lot of these things will occur on off hours and by shop floor people, so we need to make sure that there are standards in place and we've identified the process and the accountability of that process. So that's one of the deep dives into the compliance. So let's see. So now let's move on to consistency. As I said before, consistency will be used throughout this discussion. And again, from the auditor's perspective, is as most of us, I guess, are quality oriented on this call, are focused on developing the quality procedures. But how do we share this process and behavior across the organization so that not just the quality system, but all business processes kind of look and feel the same, that they all could be understood by other people who are not directly involved in that. They can move from one procedure to another and have a very good feel for what is going on and be able to see where the consistency, the mapping, the format, the level of detail, again, is consistent across the organization. And to do that is to review proposed business processes associated with the tools, again, from multiple perspectives, looking at user roles, quality management, IT, make sure it's technically possible of what we're doing. And again, it's best to form cross-functional teams to do this so that all the organizations and functions within the enterprise are equally represented and provide their input. So it's not, again, not a top-down process, but a cross-functional, horizontal process across the entire organization. This also helps in establishing, maintaining, promoting. Promoting is always important, is that promoting the quality and the processes. It then drives into training and making sure that, again, that the training is up to date and consistent and people understand what they're responsible for, and also identifying in a process, we're all kind of players in that process, and there's people who need information, we need information from, and people and groups we need to get information to. So you have to have that perspective also. And what are the handoffs, and in what formats, time frames, sequences, and again, the risk and the risk levels associated with the types of information that is handed off from one function to the next. And then the visibility of what happens upstream and downstream within that process. Another thing for consistency is performing periodic reviews. Reviews across the organization, reviews across many other different perspectives. There's a lot to be, to be said here, is that, one is just the ease of use. What are some of the problems that people have using the process or procedure? Are things unclear? Going back and making sure it's effective, and also making sure that it's still compliant, going back to that trace matrix of compliancy. For the idea, ultimately what we want to do here for consistency is have a one enterprise platform that's the look and feel at how we do procedures and how we run business practices, because no practice is a silo anymore. Everything has multiple touch points, different levels, different times, and again, going back to risk and risk levels driving those interfaces. So that kind of talks about consistency. So again, let's take a drill down in one of the consistencies. And again, we're looking at kind of the, from a quality perspective, example of using the definition and creation of quality non-conformance or issue reports. And this non-conformance reporting standardization. So again, knowing which level of information is required for that. And as we move into driving metrics and reporting, is to keep that visibility, so that as we're looking at what we are recording, we want to make sure that we record it in a mode using a lot of selection lists, predefined levels, so it's not interpretation. So that can be trended very easily and extracted versus trying to read through a lot of text input to evaluate different levels and inputs and outputs of the quality process. So that is one of the key things. Is once again, it's standardized so that the details that go into a complaint are very synonymous with the details that go into a process deviation, a supplier nonconformance audit, those areas. Now, getting into the last two, as I said, these kind of come together, and this is probably the big aspect. You kind of look at what we're talking about as the pyramid. The bottom level being the compliance, the next level up being your consistency. Now using the enterprise quality management system as your communication tool across the organization. This is one area that really has potential for improvement and use of that information. You have such a repository of information regarding quality. As you bring in other data marts of production, supply chain, and other areas of the business, commingling of that information together to track not just the goals and objectives of each organization, but also looking at goals, objectives, and metrics across the organization. A lot of times from quality, we look at number of nonconformances, number of CAPAs, open, closed, their time frame. Those are all very important to that process, but also looking at it from a dynamic point of view also, what information, what details are tied to other sources of data, such as your production system. If you have deviations, is it because you have new product lines? Is it because there's changes to the product line? Is it an increased volume, and therefore the actual rate of deviation may actually be decreasing? So that's a very key thing to look at from communicating point. And one of the areas also is that, we'll get that last line here, is allowed feedback and mechanism. So you have this vehicle out there that people are touching every day, use dashboards, use alerts, use other social media capabilities to inform people of what's going on from a quality perspective, from a business perspective. Keep the communication line going, but also make sure the communication line is two-way. So allow mechanisms for feedback of your quality and goals and objectives, and archiving that information to help strengthen and build future and in some cases remediating any issues that have come up through this communication tool. It's something that almost everybody in the organization touches somehow. Utilize it. You've got this great bandwidth of information and access. We fully underutilize that capability. So that's one of the key things we really stress very vehemently is using your quality system as that foundation, not just for quality and compliance, but also communicating of goals, objectives, and achievements. And to that point, looking at the platform, we've talked about most of this already. Again, creating cross-functional teams for process improvements and operational excellence, identify what those goals are, evaluate those, reward quality improvements and business process improvements, keep it open. If anything else, no question is a bad question, and stay the course. It does take a while to establish this type of communication tool, but it's definitely an ongoing thing, and really should become part and soul of the enterprise. And now, lastly, we're just coming to the last few minutes here, is the drive for continuous improvement. Again, using the enterprise quality system to drive that, to help the communication, it's the heartbeat and nervous system of the entire business. So take advantage of it. use it for driving and monitoring, reporting, so that people know exactly from a quality perspective what is coming and what is going on there. And just to wrap up here is also the looking at metrics, and not just, as I said, not just your static metrics of counts and numbers, but look at metrics from a dynamic point of view, as the numbers of occurrences per some operational activity over time, and see how those are trending in areas. In some cases, those will be costs, those will be production performances. Periodic review the sets of metrics to make sure they are managed and used properly. Have any of the metrics been retired? Do we need to create new metrics? And the whole metrics and quality objectives, it should look like I'll go back to my production days. It should look like a bill of material that a corporate goal that each department has metrics and controls that kind of line up with that, and so it kind of builds up. It summarizes up the chain like the components within a bill of material. And lastly, and this is one of the key areas too, because there's been some warnings and citations that have gone out about this in recent years, is having metrics is great and it helps drive and monitor how things are going, but also have a written procedure in place to address out-of-trend metrics and what's done. How often are they reviewed? What should be part of that procedure? What to do in case of a downward trend or a negative reporting? How is that handled? And again, the process to manage that is very key, and it's also something that we have seen, and I've worked with organizations too, that they have the metrics and how they align all these together, but also how they manage, because it's not always good information, but it's always information which is good. So that's kind of the process of continuous improvement. So what we've talked about today really is, I know it was a lot to cover, but I just want to get this kind of out there. We can then build on this and get further dive into each of these areas. But we talked about the 4 C's, the compliance piece, which is your foundation. Think about this as your pyramid. That's the foundation level, bottom level. The consistency of procedures and practices across the organization, so that, again, from the auditor's perspective, everything looks and sounds very, very similar, easier to maintain, report changes to, and visualization and visibility. Those are the 2 main things that we will also talk about in future webinars, is the visibility of the business information, data, and the visualization of how the entire process all comes together through mapping and very consistent processes. And then the last 2 kind of roll together, we said, is the communicating of quality goals and objectives, and the driving and monitoring of continuous improvement across the organization. And as I said, make sure that you have metrics that line up with corporate goals, kind of add up, and also that there's processes in place to manage any metrics or reporting which are out of your compliance range. So that kind of concludes the areas we wanted to cover today. I know it's been a lot. Let me know if there's any questions. So I'll turn it back over to Becky, see if there's any questions that come up. We want to take care of those, but we still have a little more time left.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. Thanks for sharing some good information here. So we will open the floor to questions now. And while you're typing those questions in, I would like to let you know that the webinar has been recorded and will be available on the website, which of course is usdm.com. Many of you are very familiar with USDM capabilities in compliance projects, but did you know that USDM offers staff augmentation as well? Projects team supports the start-to-finish compliance, and those projects are led by SME practice directors like Brian and our SME program and project managers, and they utilize USDM team members with various skill sets. Based on the client preference, we can work on-site or work remotely as best suits your needs and budgets. If you need extra hands, though, just to meet project deadlines, USDM staff augmentation can support internally managed with solid team members offering skills and experience specifically needed for your project. The goal of USDM is client delight, and that, of course, results in repeat business and excellent referrals. So with that, we'll move right to the first question, which is from John. Brian, John wants to know, in the compliance section you mentioned mapping quality guidelines. Can you explain how that's done, please?
Yes, okay. Let me go back to that. Okay. Okay. The mapping of quality guidelines, I said this is something kind of stolen from the computer system validation group, and is that try to take the subjectivity out of out of developing your processes. Make sure that that you are addressing the guidelines directly, and through traceability. It's the same way as I've kind of stolen this practice from years of computer system validation, where you're tracing your requirements to test. Here you're tracing the requirements of the process or the guideline to steps or activities within your process itself. So use that same concept of the trace matrix to make sure that you have compliance. As guidelines change, you'll see where you will have to apply those changes. And it can also helps you identify why different steps are involved in the process, and also helps identify what steps may not be required within the process. So I hope that helped, John. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Brian. We'll go on to the next one.
All right.
Okay, so Shirley is asking, for periodic reviews of quality and business procedures, who typically owns the functions, and how often should it be done?
Wow. That's a tough one. The who and the when and the what. The stakeholders of the process should be the ones that do those reviews, and a quality oversight would be required to make sure that those reviews are completed in a consistent way on a consistent time frame based on the procedure set up, and that there are outcomes of that process are managed, and any remediations or corrections are made directly to those processes. The when, most procedures should be reviewed on an annual basis. If there are changes that happen within that time frame, and there be, again, a risk analysis of what that change is, and also see if there's impact of upstream or downstream type of activities, so that we might engage that other processes will need to be evaluated on a more or an earlier time frame based on that activity. So that's one of the key things is the process owner should be responsible for that. There should be quality oversight, and the review cycles should be documented as to what that sequence is, and identify what would be required to expedite that process based on other variables or activities went around that impact the business process. So I hope that helps. It's kind of a tough one because it's a very tough of who, what, who, when, and how. But hopefully that gives you some ideas. And I'd definitely like to talk more if you have specific questions around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Brian. Okay, here's another question. This one's from Fred, and he's asking, each department keeps their own metrics, so how should department-level metrics be shared, and what methods or standards do you see companies using to create an enterprise reporting system?
Whoa, these are getting more difficult. Okay, as far as the department metrics, here's there will be some departmental metrics which are really only for the department. It's how they are progressing, how they're controlling things, monitoring their own process, and there will always be reluctancy to share that outside of the department. It's like showing your report card to your peers. It's not something you always want to do. But there should also be sets of goals, objectives, and metrics to support those goals and objectives that tie directly into the corporate level goals and objectives. I said this goes back to that analogy I used as a kind of a bill of material, that you have kind of a roll-up from department to group to maybe business unit to organization, that there is this roll-up and tracing of goals and objectives and the metrics, monitoring those to make sure that everybody is in sync and to see where the organization is progressing. So it's really kind of a two-part question. You do have some things which are departmental only, but you also would have that second one, which is a harder one to identify, is what aspects of your department and how are you supporting the overall quality business goals and objectives and the metrics that you're using to monitor that support and progress. So it's kind of a that's kind of a whole another webinar type of thing, but that's definitely an area to make sure that you have addressed those. And as I said before, just real quickly, I'll say this again, is that have procedures in place that identify the source of the metrics, how they're calculated, when they're reported, what's the range of concurrence, and anything that's outside of those ranges, how are those managed and handled from a remediation and or reporting perspective. Okay, I hope that helps.
Absolutely.
Any more loaded questions there? Or
No, I think with that one we'll wrap up.
Okay.
I do appreciate the questions and the participation. And as Brian mentioned earlier, we are very happy to continue those discussions offline. Some situations can be a little bit complicated, but we're certainly happy to help offer direction and insight from our experience as best we can. So thank you all again for attending today. I would like to encourage you to visit the USDM website to find more information around upcoming webinar events, as well as the recorded sessions of our previously presented topics. Also, let us know your feedback. We really do like to know if we're on the right track and if there are certain pain points that we can help you and your team address. I'm glad to hear about that, and again, always open to continual improvement, and your feedback certainly helps there. Thank you again, Brian, for presenting today. Appreciate you all participating in the session, and we do really appreciate the opportunity to team with you in working towards excellence and compliance. Thanks again, everybody. Have a wonderful day.